The theme of tonight's talk is instructions on not following instructions. So we'll explore that a little bit about how it might apply to our spiritual practice. Okay. So as we sometimes do, I'm going to start tonight with a bit of contemplation and then offer some guidance through it. So we might begin our meditation with a simple awareness of being here. You can even look around and notice the here-ness of this room. Here we are. And the here-ness of these other beings who are here with us. This is part of here. And then there's here with this body. Clever little body. Look at all the things it's doing right now. We can directly experience some of them, maybe feel the warmth of the body. Coolness of the body. Awareness of this body sitting. Look how clever this body is. You were standing a little while ago and now it is sitting, keeping itself upright. This body is hearing. You might be able to sense the pulsing of the heart and the blood through the body. This body breathing. Clever little body, doing all of this without our direct action or guidance. It's just doing all of this. this gift of aliveness that we're given. So allow yourself to notice any qualities of happiness or gladness or gratitude, maybe, for all that this body is doing and taking care of right now. One of the other clever tricks that this body can do is to remember things. So I'll invite you to call to mind something you've done or said, maybe today or recently, that you feel was a wholesome, kind, or good thing. Calling to mind something you've done or said that was wholesome. A time you were generous, maybe, or patient, or grateful, or caring, or contributed in some way, however small, to someone else's well-being. When you look carefully, there probably are many of them, including remembering that someone else could be an animal. When were you kind or generous or caring or contributed to someone else's well-being? And if something comes to mind, allow yourself to know that, no matter how small it is. Maybe it was just feeding the cat this morning. Allow yourself to know the ease or comfort or happiness that may come with that remembrance. Allow yourself to notice that in this body. Know that this body can register that goodness. If it should happen that there's no particular moment today or recently that comes to mind, turn your attention to some quality that you like about yourself. Maybe it's just that you make the bed in the morning. some ability or strength within yourself that you recognize and appreciate. And again, if something comes to mind, it might be the first contemplation or now this one, let yourself rest in the quality of goodness that the body registers about that. We're invited to linger in goodness when we know it. Breathing it in, letting this quality of wholesome goodness spread like a smoke or something through the whole body. Or whatever metaphor works for you, how might you allow yourself to linger in this goodness? Occasionally, the mind can be a little grumpy. It's one of its qualities. So if nothing comes to mind, no particular moment or a quality of yourself comes to mind, then simply bring to mind your awareness of your intention, your desire for goodness. And of course, that has to be there, or you wouldn't be here tonight. So, however, you can touch into any qualities of goodness, let yourself open to receiving and lingering in the felt sense, the embodied sense of that wholesome goodness. And if you like, through the rest of the meditation, just letting yourself rest there, keep coming back or notice if it changes. Check out different parts of your body. How is it to linger in goodness? And if you prefer, and if you have a regular meditation practice and prefer to bring awareness to, say, the breath, then fine, then shift over to that. But even there, see if you can allow yourself to notice any qualities of goodness in breathing, any felt sense of goodness. May all beings everywhere, in every direction, know and nourish and linger in their goodness. First of all, I tried really, 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 really hard to smush it all into one evening offering. And that actually may be part of the problem, is that sometimes when we offer instructions, it's sort of like a little piece of it, and the nuance and the isn't so clear. So very likely this will be more than one evening's offering. There will be, tonight I want to talk about some general principles. I'll read the description. Sometimes even with the most sincere of meditation practices, instructions from our studies and even from our teachers themselves just don't seem to work in bringing about more freedom from suffering. This can seem especially true when dealing with very challenging topics like dying or selflessness or difficult emotions, or when dealing with troubled personal relationships or during periods of greater than ordinary external stress. Anybody know anything about that? So what we want to look together, what I'd like to do is offer some general principles first, and then move from those into some, I don't know what to call them exactly, practices or strategies for how to kind of tease apart some of the questions that we have. And then finally, what I'd like to do is workshop a few of the questions that you have. I know a few weeks ago there was a question that was raised about evil. Like we could workshop that. Somebody last week asked, did the Buddha ever have difficult emotions? We could workshop that one. Somebody else asked about just sort of, how do you offer loving kindness to all beings everywhere, really, seriously? And so how does that work? So want to go from general principles to break it down into some strategies and practices, and then maybe workshop some of the specific questions that you have. And hopefully more questions will come up as I speak and offer some things. So we've all had the experience when a friend or a professional, we're speaking to them about some difficulty that we're having, and they jump in really quickly and say, well, here's what you should do about this. Anybody ever have that experience, And so we've all kind of known what it's like to long for somebody to just slow down a little bit and listen and hear what we're offering. I gave the example one time when I was talking, I was with a new doctor, and so she's just sort of trying to get to know me, and she's going through her checklist, and said, so do you ever have any experience with, say, difficulty sleeping or depression or anxiety? And when I started to acknowledge all three at times, she jumped in really quickly about mid-sentence and said, you should try meditation, which my husband says to me all the time. So it was sort of, it was just such a lovely example of the times where somebody just kind of moves in really quickly with a solution without really unpacking what's the nature of the difficulty, what's going on here. And furthermore, we can even do that with ourselves, can't we? Well, maybe not even. We do it all the time with ourselves. When we are having difficulties, it's very, very easy to jump in without really inquiring, without really listening, to jump in really quickly with, well, you know, Sharon, here's what the problem is, and if only you would, whatever, then everything would be fine. And so we do it with ourselves, where we don't really listen and inquire, even with ourselves, or perhaps especially with ourselves, when there's something difficult or something that isn't quite working in a wholesome, happy way. So the Buddha's great discovery and the teachings really have to do with freedom from suffering. So that when we're suffering, when we're having, when we're kind of caught in a tangle of suffering, then the invitation of our practice is to inquire and find how can I be with this in a way that gives a little bit more freedom from suffering. Does that make sense? I mean, is this something that, you know, anybody besides me ever have a difficulty with implementing some of the spiritual teachings, you know? It's like, how do we do this? Here's a quote from Roger Walsh. Well, I went before that. So that we can consciously or unconsciously enlist our spiritual practice as a kind of sergeant at arms about how we're supposed to be or how this is supposed to work. And sort of use the teachings or use our readings or use our studies kind of against ourselves in that way. And this is the quote from Roger Walsh. He says, somewhere along the path, we ran into a problem. Reality. It gradually became apparent that many classic accounts of spiritual life are idealistic and unrealistic, not unlike the Hollywood sagas of boy meets girl, boy and girl fall in love, ride off into the sunset, and live happily ever after. Anyone who has ever been in an intimate relationship knows that something has been left out of the story. So we can kind of recognize in that one, there's something left out of the story. And for that matter, even in our relationships, when we discover that something's left out of the story, we can think, well, obviously our relationship is doing it wrong, or I'm doing it wrong, or better yet, somebody else is doing it wrong. But that's, something, this isn't how it's supposed to be. This is how it's supposed to be, or this is how it is. And the inquiry of our spiritual practice is, how do we work with it? And indeed, how we work with it will be different for each of us. How we work with it will be different for each of us in each different circumstance. Ajahn Chah says, at times it may seem to some of you that Ajahn Chah was a famous Thai enlightened master who really was the father of much of American Western Buddhism, Vipassana, Theravada Buddhism. He says, at times it may seem to some of you that I contradict myself when I teach, but the way I teach is very simple. It is as if I see someone coming down a road he isn't familiar with, but which I have traveled on many times before. I look up and see him about to fall into a hole on the right-hand side of the road, so I call out to him to go left. Likewise, if I see someone else about to fall into a hole on the left, I call out to him to go right. The instructions are different, but I teach them to travel in the same direction on the same road. I teach them to let go of both extremes and come back to the center where they will arrive at the true Dhamma. So then we notice that we have those kinds of inquiries with ourselves. Do I go left here or do I go right? You know, how do I do this? And the Buddha himself famously said, therefore, Ananda, be islands unto yourselves, refuges unto yourselves, seeking no external refuge. He's not inviting us to make stuff up, quite the opposite. But then the inquiry is, so how do we do this? There's a wonderful story that I love from the Lord of the Dance. It's the autobiography of Chagdud Tulku Rinpoche, who was a famous, highly respected Tibetan Buddhist master. He was one of the early Tibetan teachers who came to the West, and his teachings helped to spread Buddhist teachings to many people in North and South America. Later in his life, he went back to Tibet, and he made a pilgrimage to see his root teacher, who had been in solitary retreat. His teacher would not come out to meet him because he essentially told him, you blew it in this lifetime. You should not have gone west. You should have just stayed in retreat and done your practice. So this is his root teacher in Tibet who will not even meet with him because he says, you blew it. So imagine that you dedicate your life to tirelessly teaching, practicing, building centers, caring for and supporting students in their practice. You make this epic journey to visit your teacher, and he tells you it was all a waste of time, you blew it. And although Chagdud Tulku was not delighted by the feedback, his inner response was, in my heart of hearts, I knew I had done the right thing. Isn't that powerful? That's amazing, you know. So the Buddha says, you know, make of yourself a light. Look to see what's true. So in my heart of hearts, no matter what my root teacher said, I knew I had done the right thing. So the Buddha is not inviting us to make stuff up. He's inviting us to inquire. I love that phrase. I like to say it in Pali. I'm not sure why, but Nibbana Pachaya Hotu, which means, may this become a cause for awakening. May all of the social and political turmoil we are experiencing become a cause for awakening. May the fact that my printer died just the morning that we are going to have our retreat together, may this be a cause for awakening. May the fact that I discovered a fraudulent charge on my primary credit card, may this become a cause for awakening. You know, may, you know, so that the challenge of our spiritual practice is, may this become a cause for awakening. The question about evil, may this inquiry become a cause for awakening. So that's really what our practice, that's what's guiding our practice. But then it's like, okay, fine, well, I'll go home tonight, and then you'll just look and do it, right? I once had an art teacher who whose way of teaching was to demonstrate what to do and then to turn away and, well, basically to say to me, you're doing it wrong, and then to turn away and say, you know, just keep practicing and do it right. And not surprisingly, it wasn't all that helpful to keep knowing that that's what it's supposed to be like. And I'm not getting there. And frankly, I don't have a clue. I don't have a clue. I don't know what to do. And so sometimes we can take these spiritual teachings in much the same way. It's like, may all beings be filled with goodness and kindness. What? You can't do that for everybody? Oh, so that we can walk away from ourselves or give up on our spiritual teachings if we can't quite make it make sense. So in this, in our teachings, the Buddha is inviting us to contemplate wisely and deeply and to discern what's needed. Is there something internal needed? And indeed, maybe, how does our meditation practice need to work? Often the teachings invite us to relax into open awareness, which is indeed a wholesome teaching, exactly wholesome teaching, wise teaching. And then the only teeny tiny problem is that sometimes we can't do that. And other times it doesn't seem wise. I have a cartoon, I have a whole bunch of cartoons along these lines. Brianna is going to show you my cartoon. This is, how to use your meditation practice when things are difficult. No, that's not the, yes, that's not the. What did she say? Well, truly, truly, when things aren't going quite how we want them to go. Huh? My printer died in the wrong time. May this be a cause for awakening? Well, maybe God doesn't want us to see the cartoon. What do you think? I do this all the time. What did she say?
I think he does.
I do this all the time at home. It's just like when my husband does not meditate. And so I'm constantly talking about what God does and does not want us to experience. So maybe God, well, anyway, we'll get it sooner or later. So some things call for action and some things don't. So when we, sometimes we can imagine that just sort of being with, letting things open. I love the teaching about emotion. It's like just be with your emotion and it will dissipate. Does anybody have trouble with that? Does anybody have trouble with an emotion that is supposed to dissipate and it doesn't? And furthermore, it turns into murderous rage, So it's like, how do we navigate this? How do we navigate this? Sometimes it calls for action, sometimes not. There we are. My guru says that if I get overwhelmed, I should meditate until that feeling is gone. Is the kitchen still on fire, honey? So it's sort of like, sometimes the teaching feels kind of like that. I should just sit down, I should be calm and cool, the social and political circumstance that we're dealing with. Thank you, Brianna. That was very noble. I collect a whole bunch of cartoons along this line, and I decided to contain myself and only bring one of them. I once had a very interesting and rather intense disagreement with someone I knew who considered themselves a Buddhist scholar, who was in the midst of a rather intense argument with a young relative, insisting that that young person needed to meditate to deal with their anxiety. And I allowed as how, maybe not. Sometimes meditation is actually not indicated when one is deep in anxiety. And there were a couple of reasons that I offered for that. And the third of which was the person didn't want to. you know, so that, but that there was this sort of, push, like my doctor, here's what you must do. And we can do that with ourselves. We can do that with ourselves. There are many different voices, even within, when we look at the spiritual teachings, even within the spiritual teachings, there are many different voices, even within traditions. Jack Kornfield wrote a book, or composed a book, edited a book of like 20 different Southeast Asian Theravada teachers who had very different views about what was appropriate practice, and sometimes would kind of go, well, they don't know anything about the other teacher. And that's just within the Southeast Asian tradition. That's not even counting the differences between the Southeast Asian tradition and, say, Japanese teachings, or Chinese, or Tibetan, that can have really different approaches to inquiring into spiritual practice and inquiring into awakening. Or our own minds can be tyrants in much the same way. Once we find something that is useful, then we have to do it perfectly. You may have found that with the guidance that I offered you tonight during the meditation. We have to do it perfectly. We have to do it all the time, and we have to do it forever. That if there's something that's useful, that our own minds can be tyrants in much the same way. The universal invitation of our practice, those of you who came to the retreat heard me say this multiple times, is a quote from Pema Chodron. We can let the circumstances of our lives harden us so that we become increasingly resentful and afraid, or we can let them soften us and make us kinder and more open to what scares us. We always have this choice. So Nibbana Pachaya Hotu, may this be a cause for awakening, is the invitation of our practice. She writes in another book, Pema Chodron writes in another book about 3 commitments of our spiritual practice. The first, she's speaking from a Tibetan point of view and from Shantideva's teachings. The first commitment that we are invited to is to not cause harm. The second commitment is to practice for the benefit of all, underline all beings. And the third commitment is to open to all, underline all, experience without exception. And then we might inquire, it's like, okay, well, does anybody think of any difficulty with any of those pieces? Our spiritual practice invites us to not cause harm, to practice for the benefit of all, count them all, beings, including all parts of ourselves, and invites us to open to all experience without exception. So we can notice it just doesn't take much inquiry, right? To kind of see those places, and they might be different for each of us. It might be a person, Uncle Lester, or there might be a political figure, or there might be an experience of mosquitoes, or it's like, how does this work? And how am I to sort out how to navigate a wholesome spiritual practice with some of these difficulties? May this be a cause for awakening. I have a friend who decided to do a practice. She was finding that she was getting a thing. about left turn signals when she was driving. And in particular about left turns when there's a left turn lane and the person in front of her didn't move when the light turned green. And that she just found that she was getting a thing about that. And so she started to watch her own experience. And we don't have time to tell you the whole story, so I'll wait and tell you the whole story the next time. But it was sort of an interesting inquiry about how do I work with this? How do I work with this? You know, here I am, I'm out in traffic, something needs to happen. And I'm finding myself getting a thing about it. And so maybe since a lot of people were responding, Jeff, to your question, maybe we can respond to that a little bit in terms of the first noble truth. There is bummers. You know, there are, as Jean is saying, there are things that happen in every life. This begins to consider the question last week about did the Buddha have difficult emotions? The Buddha clearly had pain. And when he was dying, the suttas talk about his pain, that he was in quite a lot of pain. He had dysentery, he was dying, he had quite a lot of pain. May this become a cause for awakening. How do you do that? So the experience of pain, the Buddha teaches, is different from the experience of suffering. How do I be with left turn, nobody's moving, light is green, I'm in a hurry? How do I do this in a way that is wholesome? Do I let, mixing metaphors, do I let the kitchen burn? What do I do? How can this be a cause for awakening? So I'm going to invite you during the week to look at things that are difficult, if you have any experience of anything difficult during the week. Pardon? It might happen, it could happen. If not, give me a call. I'll tell you some of mine. But look and see if you have anything difficult that happens. Just look and see. Is there pain or is there suffering? And in the sutta, it says, I got it someplace here and I don't know if I can find it quickly. What the sutta says about that. Can't find it quickly. I got too many pages here because I couldn't put it shorter. Anyway, the sutta says very clearly that the Buddha was able to have awareness of the pain without suffering. So is there, can there be a difference between pain, which is inevitable, things that are yucky, that are bummers, thank you, happen. Things that are yucky happen. They just do. Causes and conditions. My printer died at exactly the worst possible. No, it probably could have been worse. At a difficult moment, my printer died. Difficult things happen. It's just how life is. How am I going to be with this is the distinction between the pain and the suffering. And we all know the experience of something that is maybe not even painful to somebody else. Have you ever had the experience where, again, where you have something painful happen and you start to tell somebody about it and they say, well, just do this. Don't be ridiculous. Just do this. And it'd be, and we can have all sorts of responses to that. So the inquiry of our spiritual practice really is when we find ourselves caught, may this be a cause for awakening. But then how do we bring our spiritual practice right into that moment? First noble truth, one, is to be aware that it's universal. Pain, unpleasant things happening, the ending of pleasant things, just simply being confused. Anybody confused about the news these days? You know, just simply being confused can be suffering. So the ending of the pleasant, the arising of the unpleasant, and just ignorance, not understanding what's going on, can be can bring suffering, or can be a cause for awakening. So, first noble truth, it's universal. Could we not take it personally? You know, I love the quote about relationships. Do you know how it is in relationship when something difficult happens and we take it very personally? Ideally, personally about the other person. You know, my life would be happy if you would. Yeah. So I'm going to invite you to notice things that are hard and places where it's a little challenging to be with the difficult in a way that is not landing us in suffering. Jean just reminded me of Shinzen's quote that suffering equals pain plus times resistance. That's right. And so we'll certainly work with that. Okay. But in the meantime, so the invitation really is, see if you could notice even as we talk that there's a little bit of a push to solve the problems, you know, and that's fine, except that often we have problems that we don't know how to solve, and we don't really pause enough to inquire so that we can see how we can work with them. That we either make them my fault, my inadequacy, I either make them my fault, my inadequacy, or your fault, your inadequacy, or what? What problem? I don't see any problems. Okay, so just notice. So see, I'm just going to invite you to let yourself notice a place where there's something that is a little bit difficult, or maybe even a lot difficult to inquire into. How do we be with this? All right, a little over time, sorry, but I'm on page 6 of 22.